Hi everyone, my name is Lucian. Most of you know me from Twitter as Triangle Investor. In today's edition of CEO and Market Expert Interviews, I'm joined by my returning guest, Philip Williams, Consolidated Uranium CEO. Phil, welcome once again in my show. It's great to have you, and congrats on the merger deal with ISO Energy.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me back. Look forward to chatting.
Yeah. Could you explain to us a little bit more details of how this business transaction came about? Whether the negotiations were difficult or all went pretty smoothly?
Sure. Look, it came about earlier this year, and for those of you that know our story, and it's pretty obvious by the name, we're a consolidator, right? So we started this business 3 years ago, and with the whole strategy is acquire a global portfolio of projects. Yeah. And for us, every transaction that we've done, I think, has added a more marquee asset, whether it's larger, higher grade, more advanced, and we've continued to build up the portfolio in that way. The thing that's always been missing, and what investors have been talking to us about, is the Athabasca Basin, and we recognize the Athabasca as being the most desirable place to be. And so when the idea came around, it instantly resonated with me. I had to think about it, and I had to kind of figure out, okay, what would be the strategy and how would we take it forward? And so it's taken some time to get to here. It was quite a bit earlier in the year that the first conversations happened. But I think when we really sat down and started talking, both sides understood what each other could deliver to the combination. And you can see by the way that it was structured, it really is a partnership. This is not an acquisition and, okay, we're moving on and the ISO team. This is a partnership, whether it's on the board or management, the way the assets fit together. So I think when both sides kind of came to that conclusion, hey, let's take the best parts of both companies, put them together, and move on to, as a team, as a collective, I think that's when really we got a lot of traction for it.
This transaction is close to a 26, I think, premium deal, and you will become a CEO and you will have 2 board seats. What are the most important benefits from this deal for Consolidated Uranium shareholders?
Look, I think it starts with the asset. And for those that know or don't know, ISO Energy was spun out originally from NextGen in 2016. The discovery of the Hurricane deposit a couple of years ago drilled off what is unquestionably one of the best resources in the basin. So shareholders get access to that. Behind that, there's an unbelievable exploration portfolio that, quite frankly, has been underexplored since the discovery of Hurricane, because all the resources of ISO went into that discovery, as they rightly should have. But we're gonna go and see if we can unlock more value out of the exploration portfolio. And we can talk a bit about this later, but the team that ISO has are experts in the basin in exploration. And so we're going to bring all of that expertise to bear there. So you're getting that. But again, you're getting part of a platform that will continue on with the business plan that Consolidated really started and has in the first place. And I think that's really one of the things that the ISO side saw, is that we're like-minded about where the uranium market's going. It's going higher for longer, and owning assets and a diversified portfolio of projects with the vision of being a multi-asset producer is where they want it to go. And I think they see this as transformational for them to put them on that path. Similarly, we see it as transformational for us in terms of getting us access to some of the most coveted, desirable assets in the world.
When is this transaction scheduled to close, and under what terms?
So as you would have seen, we announced a financing contemporaneously with the transaction. That'll close in a couple of weeks, and we're working through the timeline with the various filings that need to be made. We have to put a circular out. Our shareholders have to vote on the transaction. I would expect we will be done all of that, and there's a lot of steps along the way, but I'm going to say we'll be done that in early December, and the transaction will close then.
Okay. You mentioned timing. My question is, since we are seeing a big rise in uranium prices and uranium equities going higher too, do you believe this was a good timing to do this transaction, or maybe wait for even bigger valuations if and when bull market speeds up even more? What's your
No,
take on this?
I
I know what's your take. You did this transaction, but spread on
yeah,
the.
I think it's the perfect timing. And quite frankly, when we started down the path, we didn't know what the market conditions were going to be on the day of announcement. You don't wake up in the morning and decide to do a transaction like this. It took
Of course.
months to get from the first conversation to here. So you really are where you are in that moment. But I couldn't be more excited about where the market is. And because it's the coming together versus a takeout. If it was a takeout, you might say, hey, I think if I think uranium's gonna be $100, maybe I'll wait and get a higher premium. But in this case, the stocks have been, outside of a few anomalous times in the last year, the stocks have basically traded within a band to each other. So I think about it on a relative basis. But where I think things get really exciting is the bigger companies are getting more fund flows, they're getting more investor eyeballs, and they're getting more attention from utilities. And that's the camp that we want to be in. So doing it now, just as things are really starting to pick up, I think is perfect timing for us. We're going to attract more capital. We're going to, both in terms of the investment, in terms of new investors into the company, but ETF fund flows, and also utilities. So I think the timing is actually perfect.
Yeah, agreed. Did you and ISO management already discuss which projects in the pipeline to go into the development and production first? And if you can give us some time frame of those developments?
Yeah, look, the way the portfolio kind of fits together, again, it's very complementary. The projects aren't stepping on each other in terms of timeline. The first projects to production will still be the consolidated projects, the Utah past producing, fully permitted mines that we discussed on the last call. Those will be the first ones into production. And give or take 12 months is when I think those will go into back into production earnestly. Again, as you would know, the timing of our production is linked to Energy Fuels and the timing of them reopening the White Mesa mill.
Okay, those were development and production assets. What about exploration projects in Athabasca, Australian projects, South African project? Have you come up with the plan for development of these projects, or you will decide later on those projects?
Yeah, so if we just look at the use of proceeds from the financing, we're allocating funds, of course, to those Utah mines. We're allocating, and then we're allocating funds to Hurricane. There's incremental drilling to be done there, and we're also looking at like an economic analysis of that project. So how will we mine it technically, and what will that look like financially? So resources are being put there, and then resources for the next 12 months will be allocated towards exploring the Athabasca portfolio that we talked a little bit about just a second ago. But there are tremendous opportunities there, lots of prospective ground with targets that have, are highly ranked based on, the criteria that everyone would know is what makes a good exploration target in the basin. We have some very high ranking projects in the exploration portfolio.
Yeah, definitely. Can you explain what is changing, if any, with the planned spin-out of Premier American Uranium, and what are the next steps for that development?
Yeah, so nothing's changing. In fact, that spin-out will complete before this transaction completes. We filed the listing application with the TSX Venture Exchange. So some of the timing for that is in their hands, of course. I expect we're talking about maybe a month before that's listed, but nothing's changed. The initial capital has been raised. We raised $7 million as part of that transaction, and we're gonna distribute half of the shares that CUR got. So about 3.9 million shares will be distributed to CUR shareholders, and that will happen before the transaction. So it's only the CUR shareholders today or of record who own it on the record date will get them. And then the remaining shares will be held back, and those will ultimately go into the merged company.
Okay. One question regarding your strategic alliance with Energy Fuels and tool milling agreement for production from your project. Is at any way this affected by this deal, this merger?
No, in fact, the opposite. And I think one thing that should be highlighted when we announced the financing, we announced the participants. And the participants in that financing were NextGen, Mega Uranium, Energy Fuels, and Sachem Cove. Energy Fuels is critical because they're gonna, so they own 16% of us today. On a pro forma basis, they'll own around 5%. They're maintaining that interest because they see the potential of our company to be an important source of supply for the mill, and so they wanted to participate and show their participation to the market. And I think that's the only endorsement that people need. Don't listen to me. Listen to that endorsement of Energy Fuels saying, we're behind this company. We're maintaining a significant interest, and we want them to be we see them as our partner in terms of filling the mill.
Yeah, you already mentioned that accessing to capital and liquidity will be much better after this deal. And do you think that you will be able to move the project at a faster pace after that? I mean, both Consolidated and ISO assets, since the equity value of this combined company is around $900 million. So it's a serious big company. Do you think that you will move the projects faster?
So, some of the speed to development is not dictated by the size of the company. There are permitting regimes that have to be and there's steps towards project development. So I don't necessarily think that, for example, Hurricane will move faster, but I think it can move very fast. Well, A, because the work is being done right now. B, because there are other players in the basin, and whether it's Denison or whether it's Fission or whether NextGen, who have started permitting processes. I think that's laying a great foundation for us to draft in behind. You're not starting from scratch in that jurisdiction in terms of permitting. Where I think we could get, and in the U.S., it's really the timing there is really dictated by, again, Energy Fuels opening up the mill, and that's contingent on a couple of things. It's the price of uranium, and it's just the ability of Energy Fuels to staff up the mill and get their mines ready to deliver the ore. But where I think we could get some significant benefits from this transaction is some of the call option projects in the CUR portfolio. And by that, I'm talking about Coles Hill in Virginia and Matoush in Quebec. And these are projects that have had historical impediments to development that we've been working patiently and judiciously in the background to try to overcome, and we're making some strides there. But I think whether it's the First Nations groups that we're talking to or the politicians that we're talking to see the company that's the counterparty being as big as we are, with the access to capital and, quite frankly, the backing that we have. And we didn't, I touched on NextGen being one of our backers. Having NextGen behind us as a 35% owner, the way that they've advanced their project, the high standards that they've achieved with First Nations, with getting political support. If we can get some of that benefit to bear on our work in those jurisdictions, I think we increase the probabilities of success there dramatically just through doing this transaction.
You said NextGen will have 35% of the company. Who are your other strategic shareholders, and what are their percentages?
Yeah, so NextGen's 35, and then Mega Uranium will be 2% pro forma. They're a shareholder of CUR. NextGen was a shareholder of ISO. Energy Fuels is going from 16% of CUR today to about 5%. And again, they're writing their check. And then Sachem Cove, I consider them a strategic investor, leader in this space. Obviously, I think a lot of your viewers would know Mike Alkin,
of course,
by name and seen. I mean, and so he has him and his group have spent a lot of time working with us. Obviously, they're important on Premier American Uranium. They're big investors there and backers. I don't know exactly what percentage they hold. They're not above the filing threshold, but I would say it's safe to say there'd be a significant portion of the company going forward.
Yeah, it's good to have Mike. I mean, his company on the board, definitely. Okay, after this deal is closed, how many people will the company have on board, and if you can say who are they?
Yeah, so we're a very lean team, and for the most part, we have consultants. There's only a handful of full-time employees, being myself and Marty Tunney in the C level. We do have a small team of people in Argentina and Australia and in the United States. And in on the ISO side, they have an office in Saskatchewan. And it's really their team is really an exploration focused team. We're merging the management team. So I'm going to be the CEO. Tim Gabrick, who's the current CEO of ISO, will be the president. Marty, I mentioned, will stay on obviously as COO. And then you have Daryl Clark and Dan Brisbane, and we're just on the top level being VPX and development, Executive Vice President of Exploration Development. That's Daryl. Vice President of Exploration is Dan. And then Graham, who's the CFO of ISO, will be the CFO of the combined company. And then in total, I would say on a full-time basis, we'll probably have about 20 people at the company. And then, of course, consultants that help us in the various areas with different projects.
Of course. Do you plan to pursue more aggressive on M&A with a stronger platform? And what would be your future focus? Is it Canada? Is it United States or some other locations like Australia, South America?
Okay, so great question. I think to answer it quickly, the answer is yes. We're going to continue to be aggressive, and that's a big part of why we're doing this, so we can be in a great position to continue on the M&A front. But what will we do? So the strategy again is multi-asset producer in the best jurisdictions in the world. And we think those are Canada, Australia, and the US. And so if you look at what we have, there are some obvious targets in those three jurisdictions. And we like those jurisdictions because investors like those jurisdictions, utilities like those jurisdictions. There's only one company that's in those three jurisdictions, and that's Cameco. So we think we've got a good pathway, and I think that's going to resonate. But so what we're trying to do is find development projects that make sense, that fit in our pipeline in those jurisdictions. And I think when you look around the world, you can see there are, one of the things about uranium that and your audience may or may not know is that single asset companies are inherently more risky, no matter what jurisdiction they are in, quite frankly. Forget about the high risk jurisdictions that we already know are high risk. You could have a great project in a good jurisdiction and something comes out of the blue, and we can mention a few of them or not, but we've seen them happen just this summer. Something comes out of the blue, and if you don't have other projects, your stock's going to be down 40 to 50% in a matter of weeks. So those companies are out there, and I think they're seeing what we're doing, and they're looking at this platform and going, hey, I should get involved in that platform. I think this would be better for my shareholders and give us, and we'll build a very significant uranium company together. So that's kind of how we look at the world in terms of where we want to go, what stage of project, and then you can make your short list of what the targets are. I'm sure you'll come up with a lot of the same names that we're already looking at.
Okay. Phil, has there been any discussion for further plans for potential uplisting to New York Stock Exchange, maybe?
So yes, on an internal basis today, we haven't done anything formally, and we have to wait for the transaction to close. The other thing that I think I know we're also talking about is an uplist to the Toronto Stock Exchange. So investors shouldn't be surprised if they see movement on both of those fronts over the coming months post the closing of the transaction. Okay. And it makes sense because that's where all our peers are, right? So in this now higher level of market cap, look at where those companies trade. We want to trade on the same platforms.
Yeah. And have you discussed maybe a name change or?
So there were some discussions early on about which name to keep.
Yeah.
And I'm partial to my name, but at the same time, there's no pride of ownership. I love the ISO name. It's got a great brand. We're keeping the ISO name.
Okay, fair enough. Final question. Please give us some timeline for possible news. From which projects can we expect any news in, let's say, 3 or 4 months for the remainder of the year? Give us some timeline.
Yeah, look, there's drill programs that have been complete both in Canada and in the US that we'll get news out from. And I think what we really need to do is present a detailed plan for the company going forward. And so on the completion of the transaction, we'll give you a really succinct timeline. Here's the projects we're working on. Here's exactly what we're doing, when it's going to happen. And I think that is probably the most important piece of information we can provide the market, and that will come out before the end of the year.
Okay, I will hold you on that, and you will be my guest next time when transaction goes through, and you will tell us all. That was Philip Williams, Consolidated Uranium CEO. Phil, thank you very much for being my guest, and I wish you luck with this new venture.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed speaking as always.
Thank you very much.